protege of mine, so it's nice that he started off with the Greek tragedians. I'm going to turn that and make it one of the Greek comedians. At least as far back as Aristophanes, we've had the observation that the wise learn from their enemies. So what fool would attack us symmetrically? Obviously, it's going to be asymmetric, because that's what we've always been looking for. Otherwise, we'd be looking at projecting the stupidity of World War I era generals, and sending your forces into machine gun fire and the like. So this doesn't make too much sense to us and what we're looking at in terms of future environment. We need to anticipate what the next asymmetric kind of approach may be. We have a host of documents that point in this direction. Our own joint operating concept on irregular warfare is one. A recent Charlie Rose interview of David Kilcullen, the Australian officer, who talks about the more we focus on the population and protecting them, the easier it is to deal with the enemy. Good point. Secretary of Defense in a recent speech before the AUSA mentions these conflicts, future conflicts, will be fundamentally political in nature. Well, that's perfectly Clausewitzian, and require the application of all elements of national power. Standing up and mentoring of indigenous armies and police, once the province of special forces, is now a key mission for the military as a whole. Same is true for mastering a foreign language, a particular interest of mine. I'm quoting the SecDef, I could be quoting myself, of course, and building expertise in foreign areas. Or from the new National Maritime Strategy, trust and cooperation cannot be surged. Well, remind us of mill connections. We have something at SOCOM called Sovereign Challenge. It brings in a number of foreign military attachés to look at what we are doing that is of interest to them. And one of those interests is helping them preserve their sovereignty. Now that's very different from a lot of what conventional forces do when they deploy, when they don't seem to be terribly concerned about the sovereignty of the country that they're in. And that seems to be getting a very positive reception on the part of any number of military, let's say any number of embassies in Washington who are not used to cooperating with us. I take this to the next point of where this will fit, where CA will fit in this environment. Let me see what slide I'm up to. Next slide, please. Good. And then, now your work there is done. This is the last one. Okay. Where this is going to take us in the future environment. How do our current relationships offer challenges, and what are they going to be? We've been talking to a lot of these joint and interagency issues. And we've been talking about them primarily at the operational and strategic level, but specifically in counterinsurgency, IW, SSTRO, we're going to find a heck of a lot of that at the tactical level too, so let's not lose sight of it. And that, speaking of losing sight of things at the tactical level, that brings me to a point with regard to more similarities between what active component CA is doing with SOF and what reserve component CA is doing with conventional forces. I come to this as a straight-leg infantry officer. I gave up the thought of jumping out of airplanes when I was at the second course at the Benning School for Boys, and my roommate was a Pathfinder and was talking to me about things that went wrong with airborne operations. Such as pushing the safety window, because after all, you got all these people out there on graduation day, they're expecting to see people jump out of planes, so the wind's a little bit heavy, but we can't disappoint them. Kind of reminds me of the Foster Brooks routine on an old Dean Martin show, where he's portraying this drunken airline pilot, and he says, you know, it really strikes me, I have the responsibility of hundreds of people in the palm of my hand. And, you know, this is somewhat bothersome. So, you know, I come to it from that standpoint. I'm very happy supporting conventional forces. But the way we do it, I remember going through the CA advanced course and being basically told we have all sorts of commonalities with SF and the SOF community, but it was never delineated. So I didn't see what those commonalities were. I see the SF officers I talk to on a daily basis nowadays are convinced they can't fully do their job without a civil affairs component. I am nowhere near convinced that we in the civil affairs realm understand what SF backgrounds really fully contribute to our understanding of the mission. So there's an interesting interface there that I'm afraid of losing, particularly as well as losing the connection with active component CA, if we don't maintain that connectivity somehow. Now, let's look at at some of this, for example. I'm not going to go. The interagency environment, certainly. SF constantly working with interagency partners. Force protection constraints. I pick on Tom Mokaidis' paper for Strategic Studies Institute on operations in Kosovo, in which he articulates what many of us had said about Bosnia, that we couldn't be fully effective because of force protection constraints. Our business is inherently dangerous. We know that. But we can't do it unless we can get out and deal with the populace. Similar criticism is arising with regard to PRTs in both Afghanistan and Iraq, and even if you look at conventional force employment in Iraq, and a specific brigade by brigade analysis that I saw recently in one division indicated that the one brigade that sought to look at the civil sector first is the one that was most effective in this particular division. Let me go back to the SOF connection again. The example of funding. SF language funding, as an example, was never fully exploited by the CA community. We got money for language. I was a commandant of a language school several times for the CA community. And this is something I couldn't have done when I was in conventional forces. The SF community had much more than we had, and they were never questioned about the relevance of that skill to their skill set, whereas we were, understandably because of budgetary constraints. But we need to recognize what that contributed to our ability. The 29-day AT option. I've recently been in conversations with operations officers from some of the reserve component CA communities, and they're telling me they're having more difficulty than they used to have because of the connection we now have with conventional force. Understandable, because that force doesn't share fully our background and where we are. Now we've been talking about and you've been seeing the CAR, the SecDef, the Chief of Staff of the Army talking about transforming the Army Reserve from a strategic to an operational reserve. Well, we in civil affairs have been that operational reserve for quite a long time. It's been our experience that you don't go to war without calling up CA. That's also true of certain ratings in the Navy and certain AFSCs in the Air Force. You don't deploy an expeditionary Air Force with tactical airlift unless you call up an ALSI. So we have brethren in other services that have a similar kind of experience to us. But that's something we've got to maintain that focus with regard to our dealings with Big Army, or Mother Army. Hey, I went to school in Harlem, I can say Mother Army. I don't mean that pejoratively though. Okay. Implications for equipment. I'm working on a C4I paper for future SOF employment out 10, 15 years from now. One of the things that I'm saying is we have currently available to us multi-level communications devices. That is NIPR, SIPR, JWICS on one device. Do you think we're going to get that in CA? The SF community is going to get it. Now, to my surprise, NSA has approved the devices themselves. I'm waiting to see whether they're going to approve how they get used in the field. And I don't know if we're talking about, one of these cyber futures where you've got to have an eyepiece over here so that nobody around you can see what's on the screen in front of you. So it sounds far out, but this is a solution to what's called a cross-domain problem when you're mixing levels of security clearance. But there's a solution to it. Unless we